He smiled while denying her a seat, believing he was protecting luxury from someone who didn't belong there, never imagining that within the next hour, the quiet woman standing before him would own every runway, every aircraft, and every executive who signed his paycheck. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Rain hammered against the towering glass walls of Kennedy International Airport as travelers hurried across the polished marble floors, dragging designer luggage beneath the golden lights of Terminal 1. Inside the exclusive Aurora Air VIP lounge, soft piano music floated through the air while businessmen in tailored suits sipped champagne beside floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway. Everything about the lounge whispered wealth, status, and quiet superiority. And then Vivian Carter walked in. She wore a simple beige coat over a gray sweater, dark jeans, and worn leather boots still damp from the rain outside. A faded carry-on rolled quietly behind her. No jewelry except a silver watch. No designer logos. No attempt to impress anyone. At 39, Vivian carried herself with calm restraint, but in a place obsessed with appearances, restraint looked dangerously close to invisibility. Derek Holloway noticed her immediately from behind the concierge desk. At 32, Derek had perfected the polished smile and practiced arrogance required to manage Aurora Air's elite clientele. His navy suit was perfectly pressed, his blonde hair carefully styled, and his confidence inflated by years of deciding who deserved luxury and who did not. The moment his eyes landed on Vivian, something cold flickered behind his smile. Nearby passengers glanced up from their cocktails as Vivian approached the desk with quiet politeness. "Good evening," she said softly. "I believe I have lounge access for Flight 28 to San Francisco." Derek's fingers paused above the keyboard. His eyes moved slowly from her boots to her old suitcase and back to her face again. The silence stretched just a little too long. "VIP lounge access?" he asked, his voice carrying enough volume for nearby guests to hear. Vivian nodded once. "That's correct." A woman wearing a diamond necklace looked over from her chair and smirked behind her wine glass. Another passenger lowered his newspaper slightly, curious now. Derek typed something into the computer, though his expression suggested he had already made up his mind before reading a single word. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this lounge is reserved for premium executive members and first-class international travelers." Vivian remained calm. "Yes, I understand." Derek offered a tight smile that never reached his eyes. "Then perhaps there's been some confusion with your ticket." The words landed softly, but the meaning behind them echoed through the room. A few passengers exchanged knowing glances. Someone chuckled quietly near the espresso bar. Vivian slowly reached into her coat pocket and handed him her boarding pass. Derek looked at it for barely 2 seconds before sliding it back across the marble counter. "I'm afraid this isn't going to work." The room seemed to grow quieter. Even the piano music felt distant now. Vivian looked at him steadily. "Could you explain why?" Derek leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to sound insulting instead of professional. "Because people who belong here usually don't have to ask." The lounge fell silent. Vivian Carter held Derek Holloway's gaze for several quiet seconds while the humiliation settled across the lounge like a heavy fog. The soft clink of crystal glasses resumed in the background, but now every sound carried the sharp edge of curiosity. People were listening, watching, waiting to see whether the plainly dressed woman would shrink under pressure or finally admit she had wandered into a world above her station. Vivian remained composed. "I purchased a first-class international ticket," she said calmly. The lounge access was included with the reservation. Derek crossed his arms slowly, the expensive cufflinks on his sleeves catching the warm overhead lighting. "Ma'am, I understand these situations can be embarrassing," he replied, his tone polished with fake sympathy. "But our premium members expect a certain atmosphere in this lounge." The woman in the diamond necklace smirked openly now. A man near the whiskey bar chuckled under his breath and muttered, "This should be interesting." Vivian's fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her carry-on, though her face betrayed nothing. "I am not asking for special treatment," she said. I am asking for the access attached to my ticket. Derek gave a soft laugh that immediately drew more attention from the surrounding guests. And I am trying to save you from making this more uncomfortable than it already is. The words landed harder this time. A hush spread through the lounge again as several passengers turned fully in their seats to watch the exchange unfold. Near the espresso station, a young employee named Olivia Bennett stood frozen beside a tray of coffee cups. At 26, Olivia had only worked for Aurora Air for 6 months, but even she could feel the tension turning ugly. Her eyes moved nervously between Vivian's calm expression and Derek's growing arrogance. She quietly glanced toward the computer screen at the desk, noticing something flash beside Vivian's reservation profile, before Derek quickly minimized the window. Olivia frowned slightly. "Sir," she said carefully, almost too softly to hear, "maybe we should double-check the executive authorization on the account." Derek's smile disappeared instantly. "I have already handled it, Olivia." The sharpness in his voice silenced her at once. Olivia lowered her eyes, but discomfort lingered across her face. Vivian noticed. Derek leaned one elbow against the marble counter as though the entire situation bored him now. "Look around, ma'am," he said, gesturing lightly toward the lounge. "These clients pay thousands of dollars for privacy, comfort, and exclusivity. You cannot simply walk in here because you think you deserve it." Vivian glanced around the room. Wealthy travelers avoided direct eye contact now, pretending not to stare while continuing to listen carefully. One older businessman slowly folded his newspaper, clearly entertained. Rain streaked the giant windows overlooking the runway where aircraft lights glowed against the stormy darkness outside. The entire lounge suddenly felt colder. "I never said I deserved anything," Vivian replied quietly. "But I do expect professionalism." Derek's jaw tightened slightly at the word professionalism. The challenge in her calm voice irritated him far more than anger would have. "Professionalism?" he repeated with a smile that barely concealed his annoyance. "Professionalism also means maintaining standards." A few passengers nodded subtly in agreement. Olivia shifted uncomfortably beside the espresso machine. Vivian reached into her coat pocket and calmly removed her identification and boarding documents. She placed them neatly on the counter. "Then please verify everything publicly," she said. "Right now." Derek stared at the documents for a moment. The room became completely silent again. Then, with a slow smile spreading across his face, he raised his voice loud enough for the entire lounge to hear. "Security," he called toward the entrance. "I may need assistance removing a disruptive guest." The word security echoed across the lounge with humiliating clarity, and within seconds, conversations stopped completely. Heads turned from every corner of the room. A businessman slowly lowered his phone. A flight attendant standing near the hallway froze mid-step. Even the soft piano music now felt painfully distant beneath the tension hanging in the air. Vivian Carter remained standing quietly at the marble counter while Derek Holloway adjusted his suit jacket with visible satisfaction. He had crossed the line from subtle insult into public spectacle, and the attention from the wealthy passengers around him only fed his confidence further. 2 airport security officers appeared near the entrance of the lounge moments later, their polished black uniforms reflecting the warm lighting overhead. They approached cautiously, already sensing the uncomfortable atmosphere surrounding the scene. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked professionally. Derek smiled before Vivian could answer. "This woman is refusing to leave the VIP area after being informed she does not have authorized access." A murmur spread through the lounge. The woman in the diamond necklace leaned toward her companion and whispered loudly enough to be heard. "I knew it." Someone near the bar quietly laughed. Vivian looked toward the security officers calmly. "I have a valid first-class ticket," she said evenly. "I requested verification. Instead, I was threatened with removal." One of the officers glanced toward Derek uncertainly. Olivia Bennett stood rigid beside the espresso station, clutching a silver tray tightly against her chest. Her eyes drifted again toward Derek's computer monitor, where the reservation profile remained partially visible. She could still see the flashing gold notification icon beside Vivian's name before Derek subtly shifted the screen away again. Olivia frowned deeper this time. She had worked enough customer service shifts to recognize executive-level account markers. Those alerts were not normal. Derek noticed Olivia staring. "Is there something you would like to add?" he asked sharply. Olivia hesitated. The entire lounge seemed to watch her now. "No, sir," she answered quietly, lowering her eyes again. Derek turned back toward security with renewed confidence. "Please escort her out before this disrupts our premium guests any further." Vivian slowly reached for her boarding documents, still resting on the marble counter. As she gathered them, a small silver card slipped from between the papers and landed softly on the polished floor. Olivia instinctively bent down to pick it up first. The moment her fingers touched the card, her eyes widened slightly. It was heavy, engraved metal, not plastic. On the front was a simple black crest and one line of text. "Carter Global Holdings." Olivia's expression changed instantly. She looked up at Vivian in confusion, then back down at the card again. Before she could say anything, Derek snatched it from her hand with a dismissive laugh. "Cute business card," he said loudly, holding it between two fingers for nearby passengers to see. "People really will print anything these days." Several passengers chuckled softly. Vivian said nothing, but Olivia noticed something Derek did not. The moment the silver card appeared, one of the security officers subtly straightened his posture. Recognition flickered briefly across his face before disappearing again. Derek tossed the card carelessly back onto the counter. "Enough of this," he announced. "This lounge is not a waiting room for people trying to pretend they belong among executives." The cruelty in his voice no longer hid behind professionalism. It was open now, direct, intentional. Vivian slowly lifted her eyes toward him. Calm, steady, unshaken. That composure irritated Derek more than anger ever could. Rain battered the giant windows overlooking the runway while lightning flashed faintly in the distance beyond the aircraft lights. The storm outside seemed almost quieter than the one growing inside the lounge. Derek stepped around the counter at last, clearly determined to humiliate her personally, now rather than from a distance. "Ma'am," he said coldly, extending one arm toward the exit in front of the entire room. "Either you walk out voluntarily right now, or security will escort you out in front of everyone here." The entire lounge seemed to hold its breath as Derek Holloway stood beside the marble counter with his arm extended toward the exit, offering Vivian Carter one final chance to leave before security removed her publicly. Rain streaked across the giant airport windows behind her, while distant thunder rolled softly over the runway outside. No one in the room spoke now. Wealthy passengers sat frozen in expensive leather chairs, pretending not to stare while listening to every word. Even the two security officers looked uncomfortable. Derek's polished smile had vanished completely, replaced by the cold satisfaction of someone enjoying power in front of an audience. "Well," he asked sharply, "are we going to do this the easy way or the embarrassing way?" The cruelty in his tone echoed through the lounge harder than he intended. Olivia Bennett lowered her eyes immediately, visibly disturbed now. One of the older businessmen near the whiskey bar shifted awkwardly in his seat. A woman quietly set down her champagne glass. The atmosphere no longer felt entertaining. It felt wrong. Vivian stood perfectly still for several seconds, her hand resting lightly on the handle of her worn suitcase. There was no anger in her face, no panic, only a calm sadness that somehow made the moment feel even heavier. Derek mistook her silence for defeat. "Security," he said again impatiently. "Please escort her out." One of the officers stepped forward carefully. "Ma'am," he said quietly, almost apologetically, "we are going to need you to come with us." The room fell silent again. Complete silence this time. The piano music had stopped entirely. Vivian slowly looked around the lounge one last time. At the passengers avoiding eye contact. At the glowing city lights reflecting across the polished floors. At the expensive watches, designer handbags, and tailored suits surrounding her. Then her eyes returned to Derek. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft enough that people leaned forward to hear it. "Do you know the dangerous thing about places like this?" she asked calmly. Derek frowned slightly, caught off guard by the question. Vivian continued before he could answer. "People become so obsessed with looking important that they forget how to treat human beings." A visible tension moved through the lounge. The words landed quietly, but harder than shouting ever could. One of the security officers lowered his gaze. Olivia swallowed nervously beside the espresso station. Derek forced a laugh, though uncertainty flickered briefly behind his eyes for the first time that evening. "This is not about philosophy, ma'am. It is about policy." Vivian nodded once. "No, she replied gently. It is about dignity. Policy is just the excuse people use when they stop seeing others clearly. The room went completely still. No one laughed now. No one whispered. Even the storm outside seemed distant beneath the weight of that silence. Derek's jaw tightened. Please leave the lounge immediately. Vivian reached down and picked up her suitcase handle. Then, with graceful composure that contrasted painfully against the ugliness of the moment, she gathered her boarding documents from the counter. As she did, Olivia quietly noticed Derek had shoved the silver Carter Global Holdings card halfway beneath a stack of papers, as though trying to hide it from view. Vivian turned toward the exit without another argument. The security officers stepped aside rather than touching her. That small gesture did not go unnoticed. Every set of eyes followed her across the marble floor as her boots echoed softly beneath the golden terminal lights. She walked with the calm dignity of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone in that room. Just before reaching the glass doors leading out of the lounge, Vivian stopped briefly beside the rain-covered window overlooking the runway. Aircraft lights shimmered across the stormy darkness outside, while distant engines roared through the night. For one quiet moment, her reflection stood against the glass beside the massive Aurora Air logo glowing above the tarmac. Then she quietly pulled out her phone, unlocked the screen, and typed a single message before disappearing into the storm beyond the terminal doors. Cold rain swept across the terminal drop-off lane as Vivian Carter stepped outside the glowing VIP lounge and into the stormy New York night. The automatic glass doors closed quietly behind her, sealing away the warmth, the champagne, and the people who had just watched her humiliation without saying a word. For a moment, she simply stood beneath the terminal lights with one hand resting on the handle of her worn suitcase, while jets roared faintly across the dark runway beyond the rain. Travelers hurried past her carrying luxury bags and expensive coats, too distracted to notice the quiet woman standing alone near the curb. But Vivian did not look angry. She looked thoughtful, almost tired. Her phone remained in her hand, the message she had sent moments earlier still glowing on the screen beneath falling raindrops. Nearby, a young airport employee rushed outside, holding a navy umbrella above her head. Olivia Bennett stopped a few feet away, visibly nervous. "Miss Carter," she called softly through the rain. Vivian turned in surprise. Olivia hesitated before stepping closer. "I know this probably does not mean much after what happened in there," she said carefully, "but I am sorry." Rain tapped softly against the umbrella as silence settled between them for a brief moment. Vivian studied the younger woman's face and saw something rare in places built around status and appearance. Genuine discomfort. Genuine humanity. Olivia lowered her eyes. "I should have said something sooner." Vivian gave a faint smile. Most people stay silent when a crowd decides who belongs and who does not. The words were gentle, not bitter. Olivia swallowed hard. "That silver card," she said quietly. "I recognize the company name. My father used to work for Carter Global before he got sick. They paid for his treatment when our insurance failed." Vivian's expression softened slightly. "How is he now?" Olivia blinked, surprised by the question. "Better," she answered quietly. "Thanks to them." Vivian nodded once and looked out toward the rain-covered runway lights. "Then I am glad the company kept its promise." Olivia frowned slightly, studying her now with growing realization. "You built that company, did you not?" For the first time that night, Vivian looked vulnerable, not weak, human. She glanced down at the silver watch on her wrist before answering. "My husband and I built it together," she said softly. 23 years ago, we started with one small office and a folding table in Chicago." Her voice remained calm, but something deeper moved beneath it now. He believed success meant treating people with dignity long before they earned you anything in return. Olivia listened quietly. Rainwater shimmered beneath the terminal lights while distant aircraft engines hummed across the tarmac. Vivian continued staring toward the runway. This airline mattered to him, she admitted quietly. Aurora Air was the first company that gave him a chance when nobody else would. Olivia remained silent. "Today would have been our anniversary," Vivian added after a long pause. "He passed away 3 years ago." The words hung gently in the cold night air without self-pity or drama. Just truth. Olivia's eyes softened immediately. "I am sorry." Vivian gave a small nod. "He used to tell me something whenever business became ugly. A faint smile touched her face despite the rain. Power reveals character faster than poverty ever will. Olivia looked back toward the glowing VIP lounge doors behind them. Suddenly, the humiliation inside seemed even uglier than before. Vivian straightened slightly and closed her umbrella-free coat against the wind. "Do not let tonight harden you," she told Olivia kindly. "The world already has enough people trying to feel tall by making others feel small." Olivia's eyes watered slightly as she nodded. Then, without warning, the atmosphere around the terminal shifted. A deep rumble echoed through the rain-soaked airport entrance as several black SUVs turned sharply beneath the glowing terminal lights and stopped directly outside the VIP lounge doors. Their headlights cut through the storm like blades. Uniformed drivers stepped out simultaneously while security personnel inside the terminal suddenly straightened in confusion. Even through the rain, the energy changed instantly. The black SUVs rolled to a stop beneath the glowing terminal lights with quiet precision, their engines humming deeply against the storm outside Kennedy International Airport. Rainwater splashed across the pavement as uniformed drivers stepped out almost simultaneously, each movement calm, controlled, and purposeful. Travelers near the curb slowed instinctively, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere without understanding why. Inside the VIP lounge, several passengers near the windows stood from their seats to look outside. Conversations faded. Glasses lowered halfway to tables. Even Derek Holloway noticed the movement beyond the rain-streaked glass and frowned slightly. "What is going on out there?" one passenger whispered near the whiskey bar. The two airport security officers exchanged uncertain looks. Olivia Bennett remained frozen beside Vivian Carter beneath the terminal awning, clutching the umbrella tighter as a tall man in a charcoal overcoat stepped out from the center SUV. He appeared to be in his early 60s, silver-haired, composed, with the unmistakable presence of someone accustomed to being listened to the moment he entered a room. Three executives followed behind him carrying leather portfolios and document cases. The airport staff nearest the curb immediately straightened. One of the security officers inside the lounge suddenly recognized the man and quietly muttered, "That is Nathaniel Graves." The name moved through the room almost instantly like an electric current. Several passengers looked toward the windows in shock. Nathaniel Graves was not simply another executive. He was the chairman of Aurora Air. Derek's confident expression faltered for the first time all evening. "Why would Graves be here?" someone whispered near the bar. Outside, Nathaniel Graves walked directly toward Vivian Carter without hesitation. Rain tapped softly against his overcoat as he approached. The moment he reached her, his expression softened with unmistakable respect. "Miss Carter," he said calmly, extending his hand. "I apologize for the delay. We came as quickly as possible." Olivia's eyes widened. Nearby airport employees exchanged confused glances. Vivian shook his hand politely. "Thank you for coming, Nathaniel." The familiarity in her tone made Olivia's breath catch slightly. Nathaniel noticed the rain on Vivian's coat and the suitcase beside her. His eyes narrowed subtly as he glanced toward the glowing VIP lounge windows, where dozens of passengers now watched openly. "I assume there has been a problem," he said carefully. Vivian remained composed. "A misunderstanding," she answered softly. Nathaniel studied her face for one long moment. Then he looked toward the lounge again, and the temperature in his expression dropped noticeably. Inside, Derek Holloway stepped away from the counter and quickly adjusted his tie, his earlier arrogance evaporating beneath growing uncertainty. Olivia watched his reflection through the glass doors. He was beginning to understand that something was terribly wrong. Nathaniel turned toward one of the executives standing behind him. "Bring the documents," he instructed quietly. The man immediately opened a leather portfolio while another executive pulled out several thick folders marked with Aurora Air corporate seals. Rain reflected across the black vehicles while the terminal entrance fell eerily silent around them. Travelers slowed their pace. Employees stopped moving entirely. Vivian accepted the documents calmly, without even glancing at them right away. "The board approved everything?" she asked. Nathaniel nodded. "Unanimously. The acquisition officially transferred 38 minutes ago." Olivia's eyes widened in disbelief. Inside the lounge, one of the security officers looked directly toward Derek now with visible discomfort. Derek himself had gone pale. His eyes locked onto the folders in Nathaniel Graves' hands. then onto Vivian standing calmly beneath the terminal lights. The realization began spreading slowly across his face like ice cracking beneath pressure. Nathaniel stepped closer to Vivian and lowered his voice slightly, though several people near the entrance still heard every word clearly. "Aurora Air is yours now, Miss Carter." The entire terminal entrance seemed to stop breathing. Then Nathaniel Graves turned toward the glowing lounge windows where Derek stood frozen behind the marble counter and said quietly, "I believe one of your employees owes the owner an apology." The silence inside the VIP lounge became almost unbearable after Nathaniel Graves spoke those words. Every passenger near the windows stood motionless, staring through the rain-streaked glass at Vivian Carter beneath the terminal lights, while Derek Holloway remained frozen behind the marble counter. The confidence that had carried him through the evening had completely vanished now. Color drained slowly from his face as realization settled over him piece by piece. The woman he had mocked, humiliated, and ordered removed was not simply an important client. She now owned the airline itself. Olivia Bennett quietly pushed open the lounge doors and stepped outside into the rain. "Ms. Carter," she said carefully, her voice trembling slightly, "there is something they should know." Vivian turned toward her calmly. Nathaniel Graves watched in silence. Olivia glanced nervously toward the passengers gathering inside the entrance. "3 months ago," she began softly, "the Employee Medical Relief Fund that helped pay for my father's treatments was expanded across the entire company." Several nearby staff members exchanged confused looks. Olivia swallowed hard. Nobody knew where the money came from because the donor asked to remain anonymous. Her eyes met Vivian's. "It was you." A murmur spread through the entrance area immediately. One of the airport security officers slowly removed his cap out of respect. Inside the lounge, passengers who had mocked Vivian moments earlier now looked visibly uncomfortable. Derek stared at Olivia in disbelief. Nathaniel Graves nodded quietly. "Not only her," he added. "Ms. Carter personally funded tuition programs for over 400 Aurora Air employees and their families during the last 2 years." The room went still again. Olivia looked down briefly, emotional now. "My nursing degree was paid for by one of those scholarships," she admitted quietly. "I never knew who created it." Vivian's expression softened, though she seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. "People work harder when someone believes in them," she said gently. "That is all." The simplicity of the answer somehow made the moment even heavier. Near the lounge entrance, the woman with the diamond necklace slowly lowered her eyes in shame. The businessman who had laughed earlier quietly folded his newspaper and stepped aside without speaking. Derek finally forced himself to move. He walked slowly out from behind the marble counter and toward the terminal entrance, every step stiff with humiliation. The polished confidence he once carried had collapsed completely beneath the weight of public truth. Rain reflected across the marble floor as he stopped several feet from Vivian. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak at all. "Miss Carter," he began quietly, his voice strained, "I did not realize who you were." Vivian looked at him steadily. "That was the problem," she replied calmly. "You should not need to know who someone is before deciding whether they deserve respect." The words hit harder than any public insult could have. Derek lowered his eyes immediately. Nathaniel Graves watched silently beside her, while airport employees and passengers listened without breathing. Derek swallowed hard. "I was wrong." Vivian nodded once, but there was no triumph in her expression. No cruelty. No satisfaction. Only disappointment. "You were not wrong because you denied me a seat," she said softly. "You were wrong because you decided my value before hearing a single word about me." The terminal entrance fell silent once more. Even the rain outside seemed quieter now. Olivia stood near the doorway holding the umbrella with tears gathering in her eyes. One of the older passengers slowly stood from his chair and removed his hat respectfully as Vivian spoke. Others began looking at her differently now, not as a wealthy executive, not as a powerful owner, but as someone carrying a kind of dignity none of them had shown her earlier that night. Nathaniel Graves finally stepped forward again. "The board meeting resumes in 30 minutes, he said carefully. "The executives are waiting for your decision regarding terminal leadership." Derek's face tightened with panic, clearly understanding what that meant. But before he could speak, Vivian quietly turned toward Nathaniel. "No one is losing their livelihood tonight," she said firmly. Every eye in the terminal lifted toward her in surprise. Fear does not teach people dignity, she continued softly. Character does. And for the first time that evening, the entire lounge looked at Vivian Carter not with judgment, but with respect. Rain continued to fall softly across the terminal windows as the atmosphere inside Aurora Air's VIP lounge transformed completely. The tension, the arrogance, the whispered judgment that had filled the room earlier now seemed almost embarrassing beneath the heavy silence of realization. Passengers who once stared at Vivian Carter with amusement now stepped aside respectfully whenever she moved. Employees who had avoided eye contact earlier now stood straighter, their expressions filled with a mixture of admiration and shame. Nathaniel Graves quietly guided Vivian back inside the lounge, but this time no one questioned whether she belonged there. The marble floors echoed beneath her calm footsteps, while the same golden lights that once highlighted her humiliation now seemed to frame her quiet dignity instead. Derek Holloway remained near the concierge desk, visibly shaken. The sharp confidence that once defined him had disappeared entirely. He looked smaller somehow, not because anyone humiliated him, but because for the first time in years, he had been forced to see himself clearly. Nathaniel opened one of the executive folders and handed Vivian several reports. These are the pending restructuring proposals, he explained carefully. Customer service complaints, employee retention issues, discrimination reports from regional terminals. Vivian scanned the documents briefly. How long has this been ignored? Nathaniel hesitated. Longer than it should have been. Vivian closed the folder softly. Then we start there. Several nearby employees exchanged surprised looks. They expected anger, firings, public punishment. Instead, she spoke like someone interested in fixing what others had broken. Olivia Bennett stood quietly beside the espresso station when Vivian approached her. Olivia, she said gently, how long have you worked here? 6 months, Olivia answered nervously. Vivian nodded thoughtfully. Nathaniel, she said without raising her voice, effective immediately, I want Olivia transferred into corporate hospitality training. Olivia blinked in shock. Miss Carter, Vivian offered a small smile. People who still recognize unfairness in difficult rooms should never stay invisible for long. Olivia's eyes filled instantly. Around the lounge, several employees lowered their heads, deeply moved by the quiet kindness in her words. Nathaniel made a note immediately. Consider it done. Vivian then turned toward the 2 security officers who had been asked to remove her earlier. Thank you, she said calmly. Both men looked startled. Ma'am, one of them asked quietly. You treated me with respect even when you thought I had no power here, Vivian replied. That matters. The older officer removed his cap again respectfully. Nearby passengers listened in silence now, many visibly uncomfortable with how quickly they themselves had judged her earlier that evening. The woman in the diamond necklace slowly approached Vivian with embarrassment written across her face. Ms. Carter, she began softly, I owe you an apology. Vivian looked at her kindly. You do not owe me one, she answered gently. But perhaps next time, offer kindness before someone earns your respect through status. The woman lowered her eyes immediately. Derek Holloway stood completely still during all of it, listening to every word. No one mocked him. No one raised their voice at him. Somehow that made the lesson even heavier. Nathaniel finally approached Derek directly. Human Resources will conduct a full review of tonight's incident, he said professionally. Until then, you are suspended from managerial duties effective immediately. Derek nodded slowly without protest. He knew he deserved it. Vivian glanced toward him briefly. People can change, she said quietly, but only after they stop confusing authority with worth. Derek swallowed hard. The sentence struck deeper than termination ever could. For years he believed luxury meant superiority, that expensive surroundings somehow made certain people more valuable than others. But standing there now, watching the woman he tried to humiliate protect employees instead of destroying them, he finally understood the difference between power and character. The lounge remained completely silent as Derek lowered his eyes and whispered the words he should have understood long before that night. I never felt smaller than when you chose to show me mercy. The storm above Kennedy International Airport began to fade as the night settled into a calm silver glow beyond the massive terminal windows. Inside the VIP lounge, the atmosphere no longer carried the cold arrogance that had filled it earlier. Conversations were quieter now, softer. People moved differently, as though something important had shifted inside them. Vivian Carter stood near the runway windows holding a warm cup of tea Olivia Bennet had quietly prepared for her. The same passengers who once judged her by her coat and worn suitcase now nodded respectfully whenever they passed. No one looked at her with curiosity anymore. They looked at her with admiration. Nathaniel Graves approached carrying a small leather folder. "The revised employee initiatives are already being drafted," he said. "Scholarship expansion, hospitality retraining, medical support protections. The board approved everything unanimously." Vivian smiled faintly. "Good." Nathaniel hesitated before speaking again. "There is one more thing." He handed her a silver envelope embossed with the Aurora Air crest. "The naming proposal for the new Employee Assistance Program." Vivian opened it carefully. Inside was a single printed line. "The Daniel Carter Employee Opportunity Foundation." For the first time that evening, genuine emotion crossed her face. Her fingers rested lightly against the paper as memories quietly returned. A tiny office in Chicago. Long nights beside her husband building a future from almost nothing. His belief that kindness inside a company mattered more than profits on paper. Vivian lowered her eyes briefly, overcome not by sadness, but by gratitude. "He would have loved this," she whispered softly. Nathaniel nodded. Most of Aurora Air's current leadership would not even have careers without the opportunities he created years ago. Nearby, Olivia stood speaking with a senior executive from corporate hospitality. Her transfer paperwork had already been approved. The nervous young employee who once stood silently beside the espresso station now carried herself differently. Not because her circumstances changed overnight, but because someone finally saw her value. Olivia glanced toward Vivian with quiet appreciation. At the concierge desk, Derek Holloway stood alone gathering the last of his personal belongings into a small leather bag. The lounge was nearly empty now. The humiliation he once inflicted on others had been replaced by something far more painful. Self-awareness. He slowly approached Vivian, stopping several feet away. His posture carried none of the arrogance from earlier that night. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, "I wanted to apologize one final time before I leave." Vivian turned toward him calmly. Derek struggled for words at first. "I spent years believing professionalism meant protecting luxury from the wrong people," he admitted. "Tonight made me realize I became exactly the kind of person your husband warned against." Vivian remained silent, letting him speak. Derek looked down briefly. "I judged your worth before I ever heard your story. And the worst part is, I thought I was doing my job well." The honesty in his voice filled the lounge with a heavy stillness. Vivian stepped closer, though her expression remained gentle. "Then remember this feeling," she said softly. "Because embarrassment fades, but understanding can change someone forever." Derek nodded slowly. "No excuses. No self-defense. Only acceptance." "Thank you," he whispered quietly. As he walked away through the glowing terminal corridor, several employees who once feared him now watched silently, not with hatred, but with reflection. Vivian turned back toward the runway windows just as Aurora Flight 28 began taxiing beneath the silver lights outside. Rainwater shimmered across the tarmac while the aircraft slowly moved into position for departure. Nathaniel looked toward her. "Your plane is ready whenever you are." Vivian smiled faintly and picked up her old suitcase. The same suitcase everyone judged only hours earlier now rolled softly across the marble floor as employees held the lounge doors open for her with genuine respect. Olivia hurried over one last time before Vivian left. "Happy anniversary," she said gently. Vivian's eyes softened instantly. "Thank you, Olivia." Then she stepped toward the terminal gate beneath the quiet glow of the airport lights while the aircraft engines rumbled softly in the distance. And that night, everyone remembered that dignity does not announce itself through wealth, status, or power. It reveals itself quietly, through the way we choose to see each other when nobody believes we have to.